So I'm outside the Oxford Hotel in North Adelaide with Shaun Rawolle, who has just published a paper in Discourse. And so Shaun's kindly given of his time on a beautiful sunny afternoon in Adelaide to talk a little bit about the paper. So welcome, Shaun, and thanks for coming.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, everyone.
So, Shaun, the first thing I think that would be interesting for our readers is, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your sort of research interest in the work that you do?
Yeah, for sure. So I work at Deakin University in the School of Ed, and I'm a senior lecturer there. My research is in sociology of ed, policy studies in education, and in particular, it's around sociology and theory. My initial research was interested in how the media influence policy and sort of the negotiations that happen between media and policymakers, and so I used the idea of mediatisation as a way to talk through that, and drew on Bourdieu as some resources to understand it. And I say it in that order, but in reality, it was also that was a case to test Bourdieuian thinking, and it struck me that I was always really interested in the effect that media had on schools, on the things that teachers had to do, on the experiences of students, on parents and teachers, in a way that, in essence, people would say is kind of undemocratic. There's no accountability for the media in the way that it does things. So that's sort of where I broadly started.
Yeah.
And so my interest in theory then is what tools, how can we understand that process and find ways to understand it, conceptualise it, think about it, and do things with it. So to be productive about that as a process. Since then, I've become more interested in aspects of policy which are about social contracts, and in particular the use of the idea of social contracts in policy and the use of contracts in schools and universities and other places. So my interest in contractualism is in schools, for example, we have individual learning contracts, behaviour contracts, these written things that students have to sign, or parents have to sign along with students about what they'll do, what their plans are. And as teachers, we take account of those things and are supposed to adjust our teaching to suit. And I was sort of interested in how that worked, how the connection between these broad claims, education has a social contract about X, how that linked to these little bits that we sign all the time, the connections between those things.
Oh, fantastic. So you sort of answered my next question, which is, you're very well known for your work on mediatisation, so I was really interested in how that, so where that genesis came from and sort of and why you think that's an important concept to sort of work with in education.
Yeah, okay. My initial interest in mediatisation came from as a teacher, I was aware of the fact that when the curriculum reviews or new curricula came out, I was aware of the fact that there would be media debate and sometimes the insertion of people's opinions who are outside the development of the curriculum, whose opinions would quickly impact on the direction that curriculum took. And so my initial understanding was, as a teacher of chemistry and physics, how that happened. How is it that this process that sort of seemed inclusive, drew on lots of teachers, lots of parents, a whole lot of sort of consultation, could so quickly be sidelined, really, by people making commentary in the media. So mediatisation so the media was of interest to me because of its impact on things like curriculum, which teachers have to teach, students have to follow, etc. When I started to do my thesis, I became interested in a specific policy and interested in how that specific policy would play out in the media. And so writing about mediatisation has come from outside of education, and a lot of it kind of says either A, the media completely manipulates politics and sort of controls the way the politics develops. Another sense is that the politics knows how to manipulate the media, so Norman Fairclough said as much. And a third account is that there's this complex interplay between the two, and you can't reduce it to just an either or binary. But either way, mediatisation then I came to as this process to understand this specific policy.
So Shaun, welcome back to part 2. So the paper that came out in 2013 in the issue on equity is called Understanding Equity as an Asset to National Interest, Developing a Social Contract Analysis of Policy. And it looks at the way that social contracts are an important corollary to market-based reforms of education, if I understood it.
Yeah, that's a good representation.
So can you explain what social contracts are and how they're influencing education policy and practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So the idea of social contracts, as conceived in that paper, pulls together two sets of understanding. So contracts are things that people claim of an institution like education. So people will say there's a social contract for education, or for science, or for other kinds of, or for other fields. And I came to that as a representation from my PhD thesis to begin with, where people said that the knowledge economy was like a new social contract for education. And so the claim that's made there is that there's a set of things that science or education will do for the government and for the broader community. So it's kind of like it's a claim of this is what we'll do in sort of we'll promise in exchange for some sort of support or political will or money. And it also, like that, so that pattern also goes back to Vannevar Bush. So Vannevar Bush sort of led some of the Manhattan Project, and after World War II was asked to write a document supporting scientific sort of funding for research, and he made a claim, which was that the money that you could see was directed towards wartime efforts in the Manhattan Project could equally be used to solve social problems beyond the war. And so it was that provided a rationale for why the federal government in the US would actually provide money to science and research in universities, that there was something like a public good and it could solve the problems. So social contracts then, since then, have been used to represent what a particular institution should do or could do. So beyond that sort of big framing, the second meaning of social contract is kind of within an institution, how the contracts between each others are regulated. So in essence, that ties in with the work of Anna Yateman and New Contractualism, where she talks about the role of contracts in service delivery. And so those two meanings are kind of what I was playing with when I was talking about social contracts.
So I'm really interested in sort of education policy and practice. So where are we finding social contracts there?
Okay, so we see social contracts in particular in things like the OECD's in the OECD's work. We see social contracts. We see the term social contract used by policymakers when representing claims about education. We see social contracts in compacts between universities, between universities and governments, and we see social contracts in things like the charters that charter schools sign on behalf of a community and it's linked to funding.
Right. So lastly, I'm really interested in the claim in your paper that equity is being reconfigured as a social contract in and through policy. What evidence is there that this is happening, and what do you think some possible ramifications might be?
Yeah, okay. So one of the ultimate claims then is that the commitments of governments are now mediated through contracts and social contract arrangements. So in particular, all universities in Australia, for example, have university compacts, and in those university compacts there are metrics that provide specific equity targets that the university will aim towards, and those equity targets are written as you know, percentage numbers of particular name groups who will be included or represented in particular ways. So I see those kinds of those claims then about equity represented in contracts as ways that governments meet their equity obligations, right? Not only to within a nation but beyond a nation. So the OECD, for example, measures things on quality and equity, and so some of the commitments that governments, like the Australian government, makes to education in relation to the OECD are about how it will deal with equity and quality targets. So then there's a relay through those things like compacts.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Rawolle. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.